Hey YouTube, how's it going? Mike the Manic Geek here. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of my Dorksmithing series that I've been working on with you guys. Today we're going to go over what I did with my H-140X kit here and some of the issues that I ran into while I was tackling this project. It was interesting, to say the very least. So to get started with, I obviously had to disassemble the entire loop down to just bare separate parts in order to get the whole thing painted white in the first place. You're going to need a 16mm wrench in order to get off all of the stock fittings that actually thread into the radiator and the block. And you'll also need a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the pump reservoir combo that's on this. There's 4 screws total that hold it in place, 2 near the fill port at the top and 2 on the side over here. Now, they're going to be different lengths. Remember that the long ones go near the fill port, and keep them in a spot where you're not going to lose them, because I would imagine it'd be a little taxing to source extra screws here. While you have this assembly removed, this is also a really good time, if you want to go this route, to remove the fixed fitting that's on the pump, because you'll notice that that fitting is not a standard G quarter-inch thread fitting. Reason for that is the proprietary design of the pump housing here. So what you have to do in order to get a custom fitting here is to purchase a separate adapter from Swiftech. It's a little $5 piece that converts the opening into a proper G quarter-inch threaded opening. Now, I kind of wish that that would have been included in the kit in the first place, but you know, it is what it is. But once you get that part in, it's actually easier to install it with this whole housing removed rather than with it in place, because then the radiator gets in place and you run the risk of damaging the fins. The instructions for this actually tell you to not remove this housing. I say remove the housing. It makes it significantly easier, and the whole process actually takes less time as a result. Now, after I took care of disassembling the whole thing, I wound up masking off all of the sections of this that I didn't want to get painted. I used some blue 3M tape for this. You can get it anywhere. I also wound up covering the openings with some wads of tape, just to try and minimize the amount of paint that would get past the threads on the openings. And thankfully doing it like this meant that no paint got into my radiator or my block at all. Now, before I masked off the block, I actually went ahead and removed the copper base plate from it, just because it makes the whole thing lighter, it makes it easier to work with, and it makes sure that even if paint does get past the threaded openings, that it's not going to sit on the copper at all, because you don't want to have to wind up cleaning that off of your plate at all, or having it come loose while the system's operating. That's bad times. So now remember, if you do decide to go the route of removing the copper, there are 2 short screws that are part of the 8-screw assembly that holds the plate in place. Those go at the top and the bottom of the block. I'm not entirely sure that it matters ultimately, but that's where I found them originally on my block, so you're going to want to make sure that they go back in that location when you put the plate back on. Now, another thing you can do while you have your pump and reservoir assembly removed is you can actually go ahead and change the faceplate for the reservoir, and you could replace this with something custom made if you wanted to, or you could go ahead and install one of the Swiftech kits that they sell for this. They have them in red, green, and blue at stock. All of these kits from all the different sizes come with just the clear plate, but you can purchase the different color ones after the fact. And I gotta admit, this white radiator body with the green plate on it, that would look pretty sexy. Now, when it came time to actually get everything painted, I went ahead and picked up some Krylon paint that I've always used. It's got the primer and paint in it. I picked up a can of black and a can of white. The black I picked up in a satin finish so that I could paint the cap for the reservoir fill port, and then I picked the flat white for the block and the radiator. Now, the main problem that I run into when painting at my place is I live in an apartment, and unfortunately I don't have like a screened-in porch area, so there's really no place for me to set up to paint without getting overspray on something that's going to wind up getting me evicted or something. So I had to improvise here. Now, what I did was I took our clothes hamper that we have, and it's one of those that has the hanging hamper baskets in it, and they're all attached to hanging rods with Velcro. Well, I took the bags out, took 2 of the bars out, and set them to the side, and then I walled off 3 sections of the hamper with garbage bags and some paper shopping bags that I had. I also lined the floor as well. Basically, this gave me a mini mobile painter's booth. It really doesn't matter if we get paint on the hamper. It only needs to be there to hold our dirty clothes. And the hooks allowed me to run hemp wire through the radiator and through the block, more on the block in a second, so that I could suspend them in place and have everything actually act like a proper painter's booth. And using the hemp rope meant that I could just, unthread it, set it to the side, and use it again. It's not going to take up a whole lot of room like if I had used a broken coat hanger or something like that. It also gave me more flexibility to actually move the radiator body around while I was painting it and not get my hands on it. Now, using that technique with the water block was probably the worst idea I've ever had. The water block did not necessitate hanging in order to paint it. Really, all you need to do is hold it and have like some kind of nitrile or rubber glove on your hand while you spray paint it so that you can get cleaner angles on it. Because what wound up happening with me is one corner of the block wound up getting this big saturated blob of paint on it. So what I had to wind up doing was using a combination of several different sanding materials. I went with a 400 grit sandpaper, and I also went with a nail filing tool that I got from Sally's Beauty Supply. I actually learned about this from my fiance when I was working on my home theater PC build back in the day because I ran into some problems with some of the paint textures. And she gave me a nail file tool similar to this that has 4 different grit surfaces on it that get finer even than 400 grit sandpaper to allow you to get that maximum clean, polished finish on your product. My mistake with the paint was not letting it dry before I tried to correct it. I was short on time. I got a bit of an anxiety attack and just started panicking. If you wind up ever getting a large blob of paint on something, let it dry, then sand it. Using tools like these on this block is especially important, not only because it lets you get the finish you want out of your paint, but there's a lot of little nooks and crannies in the Apogee XL block. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen one up close before, but it's very easy to screw up the paint on this. So you're definitely going to want to have some of those sandpapery bits ready to correct any of your mistakes that you've made. Now, when I masked off the Apogee XL originally, I masked off just the acrylic face for the water block, but I ran the pins through it and kept them exposed because I was thinking I might be able to try and paint those to be white with the rest of the block. Ultimately, in hindsight, that was going to be a bad idea in the first place because in order to remove the pins from this, you have to use clamping force. Clamping force pretty much immediately broke off all the paint. Not only that, but the way I masked off the face of that plate, of the plate here, I didn't mask it off entirely, and I underestimated how much paint would seep down into the cracks of the block. So essentially, my original faceplate and the pins wound up getting ruined. Thankfully, I had a second faceplate and pin set lying around so that I had a sacrificial lamb to work with. But know that if you guys go to try this, cover over the pins or have something else in place to hold the assembly in place while you paint it, because paint can and will get down into the cracks behind the faceplate. and you want to make sure you protect all the electronics that are back there. I think the only other real issue that I had when I was painting this was when I masked off the Swiftech logo and the water fill logo on the radiator. I feel like I probably should have attempted to remove these first before painting the radiator and then setting them back on if I could salvage them. Because what happened was when I masked off these logos, they don't stick up very high off of the radiator, but they stick up exactly high enough that you could use an X-Acto knife to really accurately cut the tape around. I unfortunately didn't have that, so I wound up perforating the tape with a flathead screwdriver, a really tiny, fine flathead. Problem was the masking tape had too much of a rough edge around it, and it left the paint finish around these logos a little cruddy. Now, what you can do to correct this, or rather what I wound up trying to do to correct this, sorry about the camera shake, by the way, but I took a really fine tip paintbrush and I just spray painted dabs of spray paint onto a piece of cardboard and used that as a dipping surface to go ahead and get in and really fine tune the finish around these. Again, it's not a huge deal to correct, but you're just going to want to keep that in mind, that if you do go to paint a radiator like this, you're going to want to try and remove these first before you move forward with anything. Now, like I told you guys originally, I did also wind up going with some custom fittings on this. Now, these are nothing special, and there's even one of the fittings that doesn't quite match. But these were leftover fittings from my home theater computer build that I did in one of my early system tours videos, which I'll go ahead and link for you guys down in the video description below if you missed out on that one. Suffice to say, that system is out of commission now, but the fittings were still lying around, so I figured, why not? Let me get some custom stuff on here and do some custom length with the tubing. Ultimately, that was probably the only other really taxing thing with this whole process, because unfortunately, when you go to fill this, it's really easy for the coolant to become aerated as you switch the pump on and off to start filling and bleeding the system. So this wound up taking me way too long to bleed. Like, I wound up having to let it sit overnight to work out some more of the air bubbles. I would imagine that it gets maybe a little easier with a better water cooling layout, one that isn't quite so short. But know that if you're going to do something like this with the H-140X in particular, be patient with bleeding it. It can be done, it just takes a lot of time and patience. In the long run, I'd say I'm pretty happy with how everything turned out. It's not perfect, and it could still stand a little bit of work, and when I go to expand upon this loop later on, I'm definitely going to be changing out things like the fittings, the tubing, and maybe touching up some of the paint a little bit. But all in all, I'm really happy with the way my system's shaping up lately. Except for these ketchup and mustard cables in here. Fractal design. So I need to see about getting something done about the cables in here. That's right, guys. Next video, I'm going to be installing these Alchemy cable extensions into my computer, and I'm going to show you guys how to tackle proper cable management when you're using cable extensions on a non-custom sleeve power supply. So, until next time, guys, do that thumbs up, thumbs down, share, subscribe thing like you do, how you do. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter @TheManicGeek. Also, if you're feeling a little generous, go ahead and hit up the homepage for the YouTube channel and hit that support button. Every penny you guys send helps me out a ton for making more videos and making them better quality videos for you guys. So, until next time, take it easy, YouTube.